This conference will now be recorded.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first in the monthly CyberSecure Canada Webinar Series. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes just to make sure that everybody gets online before we start the presentation, and we'll be going here in just a couple minutes.
This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so we're going to get started today with our webinar. Again, thank you for joining our first webinar in the monthly CyberSecure Canada Webinar Series. My name is Brendan Dunphy. I am the Director of Trust and Compliance with Cyber New Brunswick Incorporated. Today's webinar will be recorded. Participants can ask questions via the chat box in the GoToMeeting chat option. We will address as many questions as possible in the QA portion at the end of the presentation, time permitting. Any questions that are not addressed can be asked via email to info@watsec.com or the contact us option on cyberessentialscanada.ca. I will ask that you don't post links in the chat box, and if there are links posted, please do not click on the links that are posted. All right, so let's get started. I'm just gonna, our topic today will be working from home securely, and it'll feature Dennis from Watsec Cyber Risk Management as our industry expert speaker. After the webinar, all participants will receive a digital information package from Watsec on the best practices when working from home and keeping yourself secure. Before we get started with Dennis, I just wanted to provide a quick overview of CyberSecure Canada, the national cybersecurity certification developed by the federal government of Canada. So CyberSecure Canada was designed by Canadians to protect Canadian organizations. It is based on 13 security control areas developed by the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, and they are: develop an incident response plan, secure configure devices, backup and encrypt data, enable security software, secure portable media, use strong user authentication, secure websites, secure mobility, secure cloud and outsourced IT services, implement access control and authorization, provide employee awareness training, establish basic perimeter defenses, and automatically patch operating systems. Starting in July, our webinar series will start focusing on one topic of the controls per month. So in July, we'll be focusing on developing an incident response plan. We'll focus on the importance of an incident response plan and tips on how to implement that within your organization. Our guest speaker next month will be Victor from CyberSecurity Canada. So the program goals for CyberSecurity Canada is to improve Canada's small and medium organizations' cybersecurity baseline, raise awareness and educate all Canadians about cybersecurity, and increase customer confidence in the digital economy of Canada. Certification process. To get certified, the first step would be to register on the Secure Online portal, and then you would complete and submit the compliance roadmap demonstrating all of the compliance controls are met. Then you would select a certification body to perform the review. The certification body will review. If everything is met, then you would achieve certification for a period of 2 years. If there's anything missing or clarification needed, then they would reach out to you directly and get that straightened out and then issue certification for the period of 2 years. After the 2-year period, it would be time to recertify. There are 5 current certification bodies that you can select from when you submit for certification. That they are Watsec, Cyber Risk Management, Bell Canada, Bulletproof Solutions, CyberSecure Canada, and SourceTech IT. Registration to the online portal is $350 Canadian, plus applicable taxes. This covers access to the online toolset to process the CyberSecure Canada requirements. The cost of review is set by the certification body themselves and would be billed directly from the certification body. CyberSecure Canada certification mark. This badge of trust, if you will provide official recognition that government recognized cybersecurity controls have been put in place within your organization. And it also provides an easy way for organizations to let customers, investors, partners, and suppliers know that they have decreased their cyber risk. Each month, we will be doing a partner spotlight series. This month, we are featuring Watsec Cyber Risk Management. The partner spotlight series will include a blog on our website, cyberessentialscanada.ca. And it will also include a webinar hosted by a member of the organization. This month we have Dennis from Watsec Cyber Risk Management, who will be presenting on the control topic today. Now I'd like to introduce our industry expert guest speaker today, Dennis, Chief Information Officer for Watsec Cyber Risk Management. Dennis manages IT operations and oversees the creation and implementation of technical control aspects of Watsec's cyber risk management plans and programs. He has more than 30 years experience working in IT and has been instrumental in the development of the CyberSecure Canada program. After Dennis's presentation, we will address a few questions from our chat option in the window. And take it away, Dennis.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. Can you confirm that you can hear me well?
I can, sir.
Yes, good. Okay, good. All right, Doug, yeah, so I appreciate the introduction. As Brendan said, we've been at this for a long time. I'm going to share my screen. Or is it already shared? Let me go down here to, have you made me presenter already?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I just need to figure out what I need to do to share the screen. Oh, there it is. Okay. And hopefully you're seeing that now.
Yes.
Okay, so, okay, great. Okay, so just a quick note about Watsec. We have been in this business for a long time. We've been serving clients in Canada and the US since 2009. As Brendan mentioned, we are a certification body for both Cyber Essentials Canada and for CyberSecure Canada. We do a lot of work with insurance underwriters. We have something called our Intelligent Cyber Resilience Program, which includes risk assessments, vulnerability assessments, other services. We do a lot of education, training, and consulting, and we do also provide services along the lines of 24/7 monitoring, detection, and some managed incident response. Okay. We've organized this presentation into 3 sections. The first one is going to be basically some information about why this risk is so much different than the risks that we've experienced in the past. Then we're going to look a little bit about what end users can do to help reduce that risk. And at the end, there'll be a section, given the available time, to talk a little bit about what the IT team can do to manage that risk. Okay. You know, this year it was COVID-19. We've known for a long time that this was a risk that was coming. And it could have been some of the previous incidents we've had. Could have been SARS, could have been H1N1, the swine flu. It could have been Ebola. But this is the pandemic that really caused us to have to address this issue more directly. Maybe the zombie apocalypse is coming, in which case things could get a lot worse. We do recommend, we've been recommending to all of our clients at this point, that you should start adding pandemic planning to your disaster recovery and business continuity plans. Again, because this is not going to be the last time that we have to deal with this kind of issue. Okay. Remote access in and of itself is not something new. It's been around for a long time. This device in the photo here is called an acoustic coupler. When I was a college student, an undergraduate back in the 1970s, this is how we connected remotely to computers, and those computers were the size of a small bus. You shove that thing down into the rubber cups, and it beeps and clicks its way across the telephone line. I think the transmission speed at that time was a little bit faster than the fast talkers on radio commercials. We've come a long way since then. We have computers that are 1,000 times more powerful that you can fit in your hand, and they're a small fraction of the cost. But back in those days, the authentication method that we used was a username and password, and we'd like to think that we've progressed past that, but the truth is usernames and passwords are still the primary authentication mechanism that we're using to authenticate to computers, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the presentation. There are some benefits to working from home, and I think working from home is going to be a long-term thing. It's not going to go away anytime soon. Even when this immediate crisis is resolved, I think because of some of these benefits, we will see work from home continue to increase. It will become just a normal part of the way we expect to work. Some of the advantages are it certainly is going to cut down a bit on some of the traffic congestion. If people are not traveling to the office every day, that's going to reduce our fossil fuel consumption. If an employee has a minor illness, a cold, they can avoid spreading that around the office by working from home for a day or two. That actually will help us increase the health in our offices. Typically now there's a kind of an incentive for people to come in to the office to work if they're just a little bit sick, and that probably results in a lot more sickness in the office. In the long term, this is also going to reduce the requirement for office space. There will be some savings. However, we'll see in the last section, we're going to need to reallocate some of those savings to some other controls that we're going to need to put in place to make this work more securely. Okay. This is a little bit of bonus content. I've been working at home since about 2006 for the most part. I mean, I go into the office occasionally, and people are not going to stop going into the office. I think the workflow for a lot of information workers is going to be, we'll go into the office some days and then work from home some days, and so it'll be a bit of a balance, because we still need to have that face-to-face interaction. It's an important part of the way we work. When you're working from home, here's some tips, again, largely from experience. Set your hours and take some breaks. I've said many times, when you work from home, you never leave work, and there is some danger to that. It helps if you have family to set some expectations. One of the things I do is I have a sign that goes on the door: "I'm in a meeting, please don't bother me." It really helps to create some go-to-work rituals to kind of transition between work life and home life. There are lots of possibilities. There's meditation, yoga. Sometimes it helps to just go out and take some time outside, get away from the office for a little while, and to help make that transition. Make sure you get some exercise, stay hydrated, and seriously, don't sit for too long. Standing desks are a great option. Some of those are motorized, so you can basically they can go up and down to go back and forth between sitting and standing. Walking meters are great. I have had meetings while walking the dog. I actually 10 years ago built a desk over top of my treadmill. So I actually I don't keep track anymore, but at one point I figured I had covered more than 300 miles of walking while in meetings. So there are ways to make this, work better for you. Be flexible, adaptable, and one of the most important things is go easy on yourself. There will be embarrassing moments. It's okay if the kids or the pets Zoom bomb you. It's okay if you forget to put on the makeup or your hair's not combed. It's all right. Uh, uh, no one. These are not life-threatening events. I don't think anyone has ever been fired for an embarrassing event unless it was just really off the chart. This is new. We're all getting used to it. It's all good. So just, like I say, give yourself a little slack on getting used to this new workflow. Talk a little bit about, the way we used to think about security, because this is kind of the, we're talking about doing this securely. Back in the good old days, we had what we called a perimeter. It was kind of, the idea was inside the network was this safe zone where things were trusted, and the primary goal was to keep the bad guys out of the network, right? Because after all, no one can cross a moat, all right? It's totally secure. And I like this. I brought this graphic out because it shows all these new, next generation firewalls and UBA, which is user behavior analytics. This is kind of modern stuff that's been kind of shoved into an old model. And it's interesting because I think in a lot of ways, this old model doesn't work anymore. And here's why. At this point, we have smartphones and tablets and laptops, and those cross the perimeter all the time. They're in and out of networks, and they join other networks. We have cloud-based services. Those exist entirely outside of our perimeter, and often the storage that's associated with those also exists completely outside of the perimeter. And then we have remote access. Remote access essentially is extending the perimeter out to the home network, and we'll talk a little bit about the implications of that. So the remote access problem is not a new problem, but in the last couple of months, COVID has accelerated the pace of adoption of this remote access by 20 to 50x. I mean, really, this is something we were working on our way towards for the last several years anyway, but it's pushed us very far, very fast. And that has certainly created some problems, particularly in the area of security. The problem that we have to solve is the same as it's always been. And some of you might recognize this as what we call the CIA triad, which is sort of one of the cornerstones of information security. But really what we have to do is, how do we ensure the confidentiality of the data that we store and we process? That becomes a little bit of a different problem when we're working from home. Same with the integrity of the data in transit and at rest. And we have to ensure the availability of systems, both local and remote. So this has created some new areas of concern, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those. We say there are no viruses in the cloud. Well, at least not of the biological kind. One of the solutions is, well, how about why don't we just move everything to the cloud? Then we'd have to worry about this remote access stuff. And in fact, and Brendan knows this because it's been a challenge for us with doing the certifications. A lot of newer organizations, a lot of startups basically build no infrastructure. They have no servers. They basically do build their entire business based on cloud services. For organizations that have been around for a while and more mature organizations and certain kinds of organizations, it's a lot more difficult than that. You really, it's easier said than done. So ultimately, yes, the long-term solution will be largely moving everything to cloud services. If you do that, you still need an IT team. It's not like the IT team is no longer necessary, but they do need a different skill set, because the skills needed to secure information that exists in the cloud or on other places that are outside your perimeter are different. But we still have to have a skill set that allows the IT administrators to understand how to secure that information and how to secure access to it. For the time being, we're going to assume that we're stuck with some level of remote access. And so we'll talk a little bit about the different ways that can be accomplished. And there are kind of two main categories of remote access. One is, I'm calling this device access. And in this model, you're connecting a point of connection between your home computer and some computer that's at the office. And when you do this, basically your home computer is just a viewing screen and a keyboard. You're actually doing the work on the office computer. This is typically done using third-party tools. And I listed a few that are popular ones here. There are many others. There's TeamViewer, LogMeIn, excuse me. Google Remote Desktop is one that we've seen some people using. That one is free. Most of these others are paid. One of the great advantages of this is that you don't have to open any inbound firewall ports. We'll talk a little bit about firewalls later. That's good. It makes these tools invisible to hackers. It does require that you have a desktop that's at the office, powered on, and available for you to connect to. So that's one of the chief disadvantages. You're now really doubling the number of devices that you have to manage in your environment. You have the home, one that's connecting remotely, and then you have the other ones connecting at the office. So that creates some additional challenges in terms of having to have more devices, having to manage more devices, and also creates some additional traffic. So it makes a little bit more work for your IT administrator. Some of these solutions do have central management, some don't, and so there may be an issue with having proper policy enforcement with these devices. It works pretty well for smaller organizations. It doesn't scale real well because of the cost and because of the complexity of operating it. An alternative to that I hope no one on this call is using currently is to basically open up a hole in the firewall and allow RDP, which is Windows Remote Desktop Protocol, or VNC. Basically, these are point-to-point connections that are basically accessible from the outside because you've opened up a port in the firewall. Please don't do that. It's a bad idea. It creates a lot of risk. And if you are doing it, I've actually said, go fix it now and listen to the recording, because it is really creates a lot of additional risk. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about VPNs. I've listed them here as viral pandemic networks. More often they're referred to as virtual private networks. That's the way that most people are using to connect remotely these days. And a VPN, just in general terms, it's a virtual tunnel. And the reason we call it a tunnel is because we encrypt the traffic at one end, and all the way through to the other end of the tunnel, it's encrypted, which means it's invisible to everyone else in between. It's only visible at the endpoints. And you create the tunnel through all of your untrusted networks. Untrusted networks include the internet, but they may include other networks as well. We'll talk a little bit about it as we get to the end. The tunnel itself is very secure. There are no real attacks against the tunnel. If it's done properly, it is 100% secure, and that's why it's used so broadly. But, and there's always a but, right? There is one great weakness, and that is that the tunnels have endpoints. Now, the endpoint that's at the office is probably a device that is managed by your IT team. It might be the firewall, or a router, or possibly an appliance, what's called a VPN concentrator. But that's a pretty secure connection at that end, because it's within the trusted network. It's managed by the IT team, and we assume that it probably is relatively secure. The real risk is what's at the other end of the tunnel, and what's at the other end of the tunnel is your computer. And so the questions we're going to look at is, well, is that a home computer? Is it a device that's owned and managed by the IT team? Is it your personal computer? And what about the home networks? Because bad things can go through tunnels. So even though the tunnel is secure, it is also a secure way for bad things to go from your home network back to the office network. And that's really the biggest problem that we're concerned about at this point. So let's talk a little bit about home computers. And I call this stranger danger because it's like a stranger coming into your home that you don't know. And I can guarantee you that your IT administrators are worried about this, because I've talked to a lot of them, and this is their biggest concern: is if you're using home computers, well, what about the anti-malware? Is it up to date? Is it even installed? Is it working? Do we have any log management, Windows events? Are the security patches up to date? Are we able to manage the vulnerabilities? Is the traffic being monitored? And most importantly, where's the data going? Because now that you've connected your home computer that's at your house to the VPN, excuse me, it is certainly possible for you to download data through that VPN connection to a device that's outside the network. And that's probably the single biggest concern. When you're working on devices that are inside the local network, your IT administrator has a lot of control and is able to monitor those devices. Outside the network, it's a much different story. The other question we're going to look at is exactly what is cohabitating on that home network? Are the kids' computers and game units on the same network? What about those talking AI boxes? You know, a lot of us have Alexa and Google in our homes, listening to our conversations. We have phones, we have tablets, we have game units. You know, maybe an Xbox or a Sony PlayStation. And then there are all of those what we call IoT devices, Internet of Things devices. We have lighting controllers, locks, thermostats, appliances, cameras. I saw somewhere there's actually a toothbrush that connects to your home network. I don't know why you want to connect your, you know, I guess it monitors how long you brush your teeth or something. There's just a proliferation of these devices. And some of these devices are actually compromised the day you buy them. So this is a concern because these are cohabitating, living on the same networks as your computer that you are connecting to the home network, or excuse me, to the business network. The other question that we ask is, well, how many people have you or your kids given those Wi-Fi passwords to? I guarantee you, your kids have probably given those passwords to some of their friends so they can connect to the network at your house. The other thing, you know, what I say here is not all dogs bite, but some do. Not all devices are compromised, but some of them are. So this is one of the major areas of concern when we start talking about working from home and connecting these networks together. This is pretty much the typical home network. You've got the internet, you've got a wireless router, and you've got everything together inside the network. That's what we call a flat address space. I would say 80 or 90% of the time, it's going to be in the same IP address range because this is the default for most home routers. Your router is very possibly insecure because it never gets updated. So if there are vulnerabilities that are discovered, again, we don't have the polling capability here, but one of the things I would ask is how many people actually go in and update the firmware on their router periodically, or at least check it to see if there are updates available. Most people don't do that. So any vulnerabilities that are discovered in those routers don't get fixed. Routers come with some very insecure default settings sometimes. The wireless security, we'll talk a little bit about that, is often poor. And by default, you're using your ISP's DNS servers. DNS servers are basically the phone book to the internet. So, you know, when you and I want to go to abccompany.com, we put in abccompany.com. Computers don't care about that. Computers use basically numbers only to find each other. We call them IP addresses. It's the equivalent of a telephone number. And the way we translate between a name and a telephone and the IP address is called the domain naming system, or DNS. By default, when you plug in a router, it's going to use your ISP's DNS servers. They may be good, they may be not. They may have some protection against preventing, you know, to prevent you from going to bad places or by accident or intentionally, but they probably don't. So, you know, typically they're not the best choice for DNS and DNS services. You know, basically what comes down to is we're in a situation where what could possibly go wrong with all of these things. When you set up a VPN tunnel to your business network back to the office, it's done in one of two ways. The one on the left is typically it's called a full tunnel. Sometimes it's called a dedicated tunnel. But basically the way it works is you're sitting there at the bottom of that graphic. Your VPN connection is going through the cloud back to the office, and then it goes from the office out to the internet. This is more secure because basically all of the controls that your company has spent all this money on, including firewall controls. Maybe they have DNS filtering in there, which again, that's preventing you from accidentally going to places that have been websites that have been compromised. There may be intrusion detection. You probably have spam filters. All of those things are in place and at least partially employed when you set up this tunnel. The problem that most organizations have is that this takes up quite a lot of bandwidth. Your firewall and your internet connection back at the office was never really scaled to allow this much traffic, because we didn't expect to have a large number of people connecting from home. So what most organizations do, and I would say probably 80 to 90% of the organizations that I talk to, they're running what's called a split tunnel. In a split tunnel, all the traffic that needs to go back to the office. So if you're accessing resources on the office network, that traffic goes directly through the VPN to the office. All the other traffic goes directly from your router at home out to the internet. What that means is it's bypassing all of those expensive controls that your organization has put in place. Excuse me, I have a bit of a tickle in the throat this afternoon. So what that means is that instead of that traffic going through these expensive firewalls and all these controls that are in place back on the office network, you're using your home router to go to the internet, and your home router doesn't have all those controls in place. So if you look at the diagram on the right, where the user is down at the bottom, you can see that the internet and the VPN are essentially connected through that same computer. And this also creates a lot of additional risk, because now you're essentially connecting your office network to the internet through, instead of the firewall that has all these additional controls, through the home firewall that may have no controls or very few controls, or could possibly be compromised. So this is, again, one of the risks that we're concerned about when we're working from home. So this is the second section, and we're going to take a look at, okay, what are the things that you can do to help reduce this risk? And first, we're going to look at the things that you as the end user can do. We're going to start with passwords. Yes, it's 2020, we're still using passwords. So again, we don't have a way to vote on this, but I'd ask you to look at these 3 passwords and tell me, one of these is much better than the other 2. And I'll give you a hint, it's number 2. Even though it doesn't look like it's a strong password, number 1, it's much longer than the one above it. The one above it has a lot of complexity, but it's still much shorter than, number 1 is still shorter than number 2. The third one, Beam Me Up Scotty, is actually a password that has been used, it has been compromised. We'll talk in a minute about how we know that. Anything that's a predictable phrase, that's something that comes from a TV show or a book, or anything that would be predictable, is not a good password, because we'll talk a little bit about how passwords are made up and used. The one at the top is not a bad password, it's a good password. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to type, impossible for most of us to remember, and the one in the middle actually contains all of the elements needed for complexity. It has a number, it has uppercase, it has lowercase, and it has special characters, because spaces do count as special characters. More importantly, if you had to remember it, it's much easier to remember. What I tell people when you create what's called a passphrase is to create a passphrase that you can basically create a picture in your mind to represent that. Because as humans, we're very bad at remembering numbers. We're okay at remembering words, but we're much better at remembering pictures. So once you kind of build a picture in your mind, it's much easier to remember that password. And, when we're using these phrases, as I said, length is much more important than complexity. Anything is an unpredictable combination of 2 or more words is good. Avoid names and single dictionary words, and we'll talk about in a minute why that's true. And spaces are usually allowed, but not always. Sometimes spaces are not allowed in password. If that's the case, you can use a dash instead. Just a quick little bit about the way passwords are broken. There are 2 ways that people crack passwords. One is simply by guessing, and it is literally, can you guess what this would be? So anything that's related to your personal life, your favorite sports team, your children's names, your phone number, your address, those are bad things to use in a password because those are things that people can find out about you. We'll talk about that a bit in a minute. The other thing is the reason we don't want to use any names or dictionary words is that there are what we call, well, basically you can think of it as a lookup table. So anything that's in a dictionary in any language or a name or even any variation of that. So if your name is Susan and you put in a $ instead of the word S, that doesn't help you because all of these things have been compiled and put into lookup tables that are indexed. So basically, these tables are of different sizes, but anything that's in that table is easily cracked because all you have to do is basically look at the encrypted version of the password, because these passwords are encrypted in a couple of different ways. If we can look at the encrypted version and find it in a table, we can relate that back to the password that created it. So as long as you're sticking with unrelated terms, but things that you, again, as I said, you can make into a picture so you can remember them more easily, these are very strong passwords. Couple of rules, because we always need to have some rules. Number one, don't share your toothbrush and don't share your passwords. Basically, keep them to yourself. An important one is use a unique password for anything important. The reason is if you use your email password to log into your gym membership and the website where you log in gets compromised, and it's important to know that websites get compromised every day. Every day there are probably hundreds of websites that are being compromised. And what happens is the bad guys download the passwords. Now those passwords hopefully are not stored in plain text, although sadly some websites still do store your passwords as plain text. But many of them store the passwords in ways that are what we call weak encryption. So what happens is the bad guys download those, they crack all the passwords, and they put those on the dark web. Basically for people to buy or just to do whatever they want with. Sometimes they're down there for free. So if you've used your email password on your gym membership and that website gets compromised, your email has also been compromised, because the first thing that people are going to do is take that same password combination, go see if they can log into your email. The best way to remember passwords is to use a password manager. I've listed a couple here, LastPass, there's 1Password, there are many others. You can just do an internet search for password managers. This is the only way you can really create good complex passphrases for every website you use and still be able to remember them. And these will integrate with your browser, so when you go to the website with your browser, it will automatically fill in the username and the password. So it's a much easier way to manage this. If you want to know whether a password has been compromised, you can go to haveibeenpwned.com. If a password is there, don't use it, because that means that it probably exists in one of those lookup tables that we just discussed, and can be easily compromised. One of the things you need to be aware of if you're working from home is you are likely to be targeted as a way to compromise your company or your organization. And we have seen a very substantial increase in attacks on individuals. And the reason is we know where you work. It is quite easy using public information, job sites, LinkedIn and other resources. It's pretty easy to build a list of the people who work for a particular company or organization. So the bad guys have figured out that the easiest way to gain entry into a company is to compromise one of the employees, possibly by attacking their personal email, because the personal email bypasses all of those expensive spam filters that your company's paid for. And that creates a door into the organization. So you have to be particularly wary about phishing emails and other social engineering attacks. If say you're, who are you? And this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but in 10 minutes, I may not be able to know more about you than your mother does, but I can easily find out enough about you to create a very sophisticated phishing attack. Again, these are targeted attacks, but if I want to get into your organization, am I willing to spend 10 minutes and maybe $5 or $10? Because in the bottom here, we talk about paid databases. These are not expensive. Sometimes for $5 or $10 per user, I can get a tremendous amount of information. I can get information from social media sites, any church, family, or other groups that we belong to. Certainly LinkedIn typically has a lot of information, job sites, public databases, and paid databases. And just as a quick example, one of the things I could do is I might do a search for you as a person who works for your organization, and certainly people in executive positions or positions that have access to valuable information, like people at HR, the CFO. These are the primary targets. And what I might do is if I find out that your children, maybe I find out one of your kids plays soccer. So now I'll go to the website for the soccer team and find the name of the coach. But what I might do is craft an email to you saying, hey, we've had to change the practice schedule. Here's a list of the new practice times. I send you a document. Well, if that document contains malicious code and you open it, you have been compromised. And these can be very sophisticated and very difficult to detect. And the most common way I would do this would be to send you a Microsoft Office document. Microsoft Office is the most attacked application on the internet. And I tell people the two most dangerous words on the internet are enable content, because this is how Microsoft Office documents are able to execute code on your computer and provide a backdoor to an attacker. There are a couple things you can do to protect against this. Basically, all documents, even for the local network, should open in what is called protected mode. Protected mode blocks any what's called active content from running within Word documents. The same is true for PDF readers. You should also disable active content in PDF documents. And the reason we say even for the local network, which a lot of IT administrators consider the local network to be a trusted area, the problem is if I'm able to compromise a device on your network, one of the first things I'm going to do is search for Office documents, spreadsheets, Word documents, and basically inject some code into this, some malicious code into those documents, and then try to get somebody else on the network to open, or just hope that they come open that document. Okay. Typically, this is the sort of thing that you see. Is the thing on the left that says, if you see this on any document says enable content, I urge you, do not enable content unless you know, and I mean with certainty, where that document came from and why you would need to enable it. Even trusted sources can be dangerous, because if someone compromises an email account on your system, one of the first things they're going to do is send email to other people containing these documents, and they may be documents that that you receive on a regular basis. If you send me the same spreadsheet every month, and all of a sudden 1 month it has a note, oh, you have to enable content, I'm going to call you and ask, did you change this document, and why do I need to do that? Because this is one of the areas that we see where people get compromised, because someone gets access to email or an internal system, and then basically uses that to leverage the trusted aspect of it to compromise other users. When you're using the VPN, show your admin some love. If you can, use a dedicated device, or at least one that other people don't use. Connect, do your work, and then disconnect. And when you're connected, stick to business only. No YouTube, no shopping, no news, no Facebook, and most importantly, no personal email, because doing any of those things while you're connected to the VPN, which means you're also connected back to the corporate network, creates an additional risk. And probably within the corporate network, you may have restrictions on these things anyway, but now you're outside the network and you'll be able to bypass those restrictions. I'll talk a little bit about the home router, because we talked about how insecure routers are, these home routers. So here are some things you can do to help make this a more secure environment when working from home. Number one, make sure remote administration is turned off on the router. Now, most routers will have this turned off by default, but we have seen some that don't. Make sure that you can manage the router from wired connections only, not from the wireless network. I mean, I think the reason for this is fairly obvious, but we have seen some routers where this is not disabled by default. it is really important that you change the default password. And I've had people say, yeah, but you can't get to that unless you're on the inside of the network already. Well, the problem is if some other device on your network is compromised. Let's say, one of your kids' computers, they've gone to a website and they've gotten something and they're not aware that there's someone else's access to their computer. Or it can even be an IoT device. If I have access to your network, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to log into your router if I can. If I can log into that router, I'm going to redirect all of your traffic through my malicious servers. If you think about that, you can understand that is a really bad thing. So it is really important to change the administrator passwords on those routers and make sure you can only connect to them from the wired network. There's something on a lot of routers called universal plug and play. Most newer routers have this turned off by default, but we've seen some that don't. Universal plug and play basically allows any device on your network to say, I need an incoming port opened up so somebody on the outside world can come in and talk to me. This was created originally for gaming because it allowed people to set up gaming servers and then allow people to have access from outside to a gaming service. It's just a really bad idea, and you should absolutely turn it off. WPS is something it's this system where you go into the router and you press a button on the device and it creates a code. It's basically very insecure. It was never a good idea, and it's best to just turn it off. And again, with all these things, all these default settings on home routers, the question is what could possibly go wrong? So this is a huge help in securing your home network and securing your connection to the office. Just to go through these settings and make sure that you change them from the defaults. How about the wireless? People are surprised when I say this. Your wireless should have a passphrase of 15 to 20 characters. That sounds really long. And by the way, if you or the kids share it, you should change it periodically. And the reason we recommend such a long passphrase is that wireless encryption works differently from other kinds of encryption. And there are attacks against your wireless network that make it much easier to crack passwords than they would be in like an internet password or even a password on a local system. So it is really important to use long passwords for the wireless. Again, passphrases are better because they're easier to type and easier to remember. If you have a router that supports WEP, that's a very old encryption system. If there's any mention of WEP on your router, you should probably replace it. That means it's really old. No one uses WEP anymore. It can be cracked in a matter of seconds. It's trivially easy to crack. Make sure you're using WPA2 only on your router. And this is really important. Most home routers anymore have a guest network. If yours doesn't, you might want to consider replacing and get one that does. What you want to do is put everything that doesn't require access to anything on the internal network on the guest network. That means smartphones, anybody else who comes to your house, you don't give them your internal password, you give them the guest password. All of your, the thermostat, the appliances, everything that doesn't for some reason need access to anything else on the internal network should be on the guest network. Think of it as quarantine or social distancing or self-isolation, for your networks. Most routers will have the guest network set up so when you connect to that network, you have a connection to the internet and nothing else. You cannot talk to any other devices on the network. It's just basically a pathway straight to the internet. That's where all these other devices should be. Put your computers on the internal network. That gives some degree of isolation from all these other bad devices that might exist on your home network. This was a little bit geeky. We'll go over it really quickly, but basically your home network should have what we call open ports or listening ports. This basically is allowing somebody to connect to something inside your network from the internet or from the outside. They should all be blocked unless you're running a server. And if somebody in your household is running a gaming server, which does require allowing inbound connections, you should probably put that on a separate network, get a different router, because this is a direct route into your network. And basically gamers tend to be pretty sophisticated hackers sometimes, and it's just a really bad idea to allow that kind of access on the same network where you're doing business work. So if that's happening, if you have kids who run gaming servers, you definitely want to isolate that. I've listed a couple of websites here. And by the way, there'll be a link at the end to download a copy of these slides, so you can have this. But these links are to a couple of sites where you can go to check for open ports on your router. The last section, and we're going to go through this quickly because we're running short on time. This is for the IT people, and again, you can download this slide or you can send me an email. We're happy to help people in the IT team with some of this stuff. But these are some of the things that the IT team should be thinking about and can do to help secure working from home. And this is probably the most important slide in the entire deck. If you're using a VPN, and I've repeated this several times, you need to enable two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication for both the VPN and the email. It can save you from having a really bad day. And the reason you have to enable both is that if you enable it for one, what happens is it makes it relatively easy for an attacker to identify a valid username and password, because that's what triggers the second factor for two-factor authentication. Immediately, and this is especially true if your VPN and or your email are connected to are synchronized with Active Directory, because now the attacker is going to take that password and go use it on the other everywhere else that is available. So if you enable two-factor authentication on one service but not the others, you're actually to some degree increasing the risk. So it's really important to do it on both. I can't repeat this enough. It used to be a good idea. At this point, we consider it's just a requirement. You must do this if you want to be able to secure remote access to your network. Email is a huge attack surface. So make sure the users are trained on how to use safe passwords and VPNs. We've already gone through some of those factors for training. If you're running Exchange server locally, if you're running a local email server, give some serious thought to migrating to Office 365 or G Suite. It is much easier to secure them. Outlook Web Access is difficult to secure, and we consider it at these days to be a significant risk. You should be monitoring your emails for failed logins, unlikely travel. Unlikely travel is where somebody logs in their email from one place, and then within a short period of time, they log in from some other place that's too far away. They couldn't possibly have traveled between those two places in that amount of time. That means one of those is a malicious login. Office 365 makes it much easier to do this. And then there are also some third-party tools that will help monitor the logs for Office 365. Set up group policies for the VPN. The problem is sometimes you have to ask how much time do the devices spend connected to that VPN. There are agent-based tools that you can use to monitor remote devices that are owned by the organization. I've listed a few here. There are certainly others. Jump Cloud, Microsoft Intune is part of Microsoft 365, or at least some of the subscriptions. You might consider upping your subscription to allow you to use Intune to manage those devices that are in people's homes. And there are a couple of others that are listed here as well. Some people ask me about putting those agents on employee-owned devices. Maybe, but you have to be concerned about privacy issues, because some of these tools will monitor connections to where the devices are connected to on the internet, and that might be a privacy issue if you're putting those on home user devices that are not owned by the organization. And it's not necessarily either or. You can actually use both group policy and these devices. Just a word about what we call EDR, or endpoint detection and response tools. These are basically advanced anti-malware. They are significantly more advanced than sort of the typical malware that you would buy from a vendor. I've listed a few. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. SentinelOne, Cylance, these are fairly common. They are certainly more expensive, but they are much more advanced, and they're cloud managed. So you can manage, even if the devices are spread across many places in people's homes, you can still manage them through a cloud interface, see what's going on these devices, and be able to detect any threats that may be there. You should be monitoring the traffic in and out of the network anyway, but certainly using a VPN even makes it more important to do that. We recommend that you consider an outsourced 24/7 service that is monitoring devices in the network. Treat your home networks. This is the last one, and we're going to go back to the idea of a tunnel. And this is one of the things that Watsec has always done, and we recommend is you can treat your home networks as untrusted networks, as they should be. And you do that by adding a second firewall and tunneling through the home network. And basically what you do is you add another device. Some of these range from less than $50 US to maybe a couple $100. I've listed a few, but there are certainly others. These are basically things that you would add on. Some of these are very small and you can take them on the road. And if you're connecting from a hotel or from another untrusted network, you can have a second hardware firewall that you use to connect. For your high-risk users, I recommend using a firewall that can be managed through a cloud interface. I've listed a couple here. Cisco Meraki makes one, and Ubiquity Unify Security Gateway is another one, and these can be managed through cloud interfaces. They don't solve all the problems. They don't solve the split tunnel problems. They don't remove all the endpoint risks, but they do solve the problem of having insecure networks that are connected to your VPN. That's it. I would ask if there are any questions.
Yeah, so we do have one. We use RDP, but with a remote desktop gateway server that encrypts the connection. I guess that should be fine, right?
Yeah, it's better than opening up the firewall to do that. There have been some vulnerabilities in those servers. So if you have anything that requires you to open a port in the firewall that goes through into internal devices is less secure. It is certainly more secure than a direct connection using RDP. It is not as secure, in my opinion, as basically the way I would do this, I would locate that device inside the network and then require users to connect to the VPN first. Actually, there's nothing. It actually is not bad to use RDP or VNC. VNC is not used very often, but if you're going to use RDP, what I recommend is make people connect to the VPN first. Then once they're connected to the VPN, now they can RDP back to their workstation that's at the office. Because with RDP, you have to have an internal device that you can connect to. And the other thing that's important there is to make sure that you set a policy so that you're not mounting the disks or the clipboard remotely. And this is done through group policy. That prevents people from exfiltrating data from the computer in the office back to their home computer. So basically, once you connect to the office computer, you're doing everything on that computer. Really, the home computer is just providing you with a keyboard and a screen that you can see, but all the work is being done internally. That's the most secure way to use RDP.
Perfect. Thank you, Dennis. There's another question here. What action items on home Wi-Fi security can I present to the team I'm working with? I think that was partially addressed, but maybe we can touch on it again.
Basically, the two most important things are make sure that you're using the right kind of encryption for Wi-Fi. Make sure you separate the Wi-Fi guest network away from the network that you're using to connect back to the office. And I recommend if your router doesn't offer you that capability, you might want to replace it, because that is important both for your home security and also for security over the VPN. And again, make sure your wireless password is a good, strong password. And then make sure you go back to the slide and look at those default settings that you want to change, because most newer routers are configured more securely, but a lot of the old ones had those things enabled by default, and it was just a terrible idea.
Great. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's any more questions. We will be doing this again next month. The topic will be incident response plans. Please stay tuned on Cyber Essentials page on LinkedIn for updates and messages going forward. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye now.